So welcome everybody for our 5-step discussion today on using the Family Member Questionnaire, or FMQ for short. And today we have Mick and Paul from Ireland, who are very long-standing practitioners, and we have Dan from England from the Gambling Service, and we also have Lorna and Richard from England. So welcome everybody. And we're just going to start off by finding out about the Family Member Questionnaire and the important items to bear in mind when using it as a practitioner. So we're just going to start to Mick to find out his thoughts on that.
Hi, for me, the Family Member Questionnaire is a really important piece of equipment used as a practitioner, because what it does for me at the very beginning of the steps is it gives me a huge amount of information about the family member. It allows me to look and to see and to understand where they're coming from and what their own situation is. And I also find that it can be used right through each step, not just as a tool at the very beginning, but also it can be reviewed before I go into a session on each step. And I suppose for me, again, one of the things is, one of the situations would have been with a family member I was working with. And, you know, before we went into step 4, when we were looking at social supports, I was able to review the Family Member Questionnaire and see where that came up for her. And in that, I was able to see that some of those supports were not very helpful to her. So we were able to review that. And I made sure that we looked at the not helpful supports. And that came up for her around one particular person who felt they were giving her a huge amount of support, but actually the information and the support they were giving her were not helpful to her at all and made her feel worse. But to be able to do that, I had to review the Family Member Questionnaire. So that was really, really important for me, to be able to do that and to use it right through all the steps.
Great, thank you, Mick. I think that's a really important illustration of the FMQ to understand the family member situation. And you say, most importantly, you can use it with every step. And it sounds like that you've been very well prepared to use it in every step and bring up the appropriate information to help the family member. Yes. So thank you for that. So moving on to Paul.
Yeah. Thank you. I'd agree entirely with Mick. I find as well that, you know, it can be for family members maybe who have contacted services over a sustained period of time because they're living with this situation. It can be refreshing for them to be asked about how they're doing. And maybe sometimes it's the first time that the spotlight has been put onto them, and someone asking them about, okay, well, I know this is the behavior that you're living with, but tell me please how this is impacting on you, and tell me about your health and your well-being. And I think that can be very uplifting for family members. It can be challenging as well, because again, they're used to being asked a lot of things about the problem behavior and the situation. So that can be a great thing. I mean, I could go on all day. There's so many, again, like Mick was saying, it's a huge benefit throughout the 5 steps to have scored, to have gotten a score for the family member to help you to target specific areas that you know need addressing. So that could be social support, trying to, you know, if you identify someone with a lot of unhelpful social support, it's trying to minimize that and maximize helpful social support or engaged coping. And I think that works particularly well in a group, because it's a bit challenging when you have a group, when you have someone who you know is hugely withdrawal coper, or and then someone who's engaged. So now you can't have a standardized group, but it's really good to have that information in your mind so that you can, it gives you the targets to try to hit throughout the process.
Okay, great, thank you, Paul. I think, yeah, the important points there, that the family member, it opens up discussion, doesn't it? Focusing on the family member, instead of what normally happens is the focus is on the relative of the problem. So it's an incredibly useful tool. And I think that's a great point about using it in groups, because you've got this huge wealth of information that can be used in the group setting to explore different stresses, different strains, different types of coping and support. So thank you very much for that, Paul. So moving on to Dan, who specifically works with people with gambling problems.
Thanks, Jill. So for me, as a therapeutic tool, the FMQ, it helps aid discussion with affected family members, and especially things that they might not think were relevant. So there's questions there that are focused on the affected family member, and like people have said previously, generally the questions are focused on the person who's gambling. So I think people find that refreshing. And the next thing is it normalizes. So I think because it's on a questionnaire and some of these questions people don't generally answer, get asked, sorry. However, when you do it for a questionnaire, it normalizes these, and people think, actually, this must have happened to other people. So I'm not alone in this, and other people are going through the same problem. And then, especially when you start talking about things like, do you give yourself treats, or do you do activities for yourself? And people start to realize, actually, no, I don't, and maybe I should start doing that.
Great, they're great points, Dan. So key there is, again, it's back to it opens up the conversation, and it normalizes, it immediately normalizes behavior, and people don't feel so alone, and it asks the right questions to make people think about their situation.
Yeah, it also helps people become more aware of their behaviors. So when you go through the questionnaire, people often say, oh, actually, yeah, I do that, but I didn't realize. So it helps people sort of understand what's going on for them, and maybe what other family members are doing as well, not just themselves or the person who's gambling.
Great. Well, it's good to hear how helpful it's been in your service. So thank you very much for that. So we've had the three people, Mick, Paul and Dan, talk about using it in their own practice. So I'd now like to move on to using the FMQ as a research tool. So over to Lorna.
Okay, thanks, Jill. I think it's really important to remind practitioners and services that the FMQ is a dual purpose questionnaire that's been designed specifically for this intervention, and it's a core part of the whole evidence-based programme of work. So it functions as both a bespoke therapeutic tool that can be used throughout an intervention, and Mick, Paul and Dan have all talked about that and given some really excellent examples of that. But importantly, it's also a research tool that can be used by all involved with the programme of work to evidence the impact of the intervention at an individual, family member, team, service and country level.
Great, thanks Lorna. So moving on to Richard.
Okay, well, thinking about the FMQ as a research tool, I think that the main thing is this. All of us who work with affected family members want to help them and to empower them to get to a place where they don't feel so pulled down by the stress of living with and coping with a relative's problems with alcohol or drugs or gambling. And we all think that the 5-step method is a really good method to use to help these affected family members. But believing that doesn't make it true. We have to collect data which demonstrate that it is helpful and that affected family members' symptoms do reduce and so on. And most importantly, we have to demonstrate that such positive effects don't only happen in research trials, but that they also happen when the 5-step method is used in routine practice within normal non-research services. So every family member who fills out a before and an after FMQ, and every practitioner who facilitates a family member to do this, is having a major impact on developing the evidence base for how effective the 5-step method is in routine therapeutic or clinical work. And it's that evidence that assist commissioners in deciding on commissioning services to offer the 5-step method, and to convince service chief executives or directors to push for the 5-step method to be used in their services. So it's the use of the FMQ and routine practice as a research tool that is really important.
Great, and thank you, Lorna and Richard. So this really important aspect of using it as a research tool is vital. And for every family member that completes that questionnaire, it is adding to this body of knowledge. And it is vital for lots of organisations to demonstrate the outcomes of the intervention. So it's really helpful to have these results, and that can help with convincing funders, commissioners, stakeholders to further invest in the 5-step method. So the importance there is about it as a counselling tool, therapeutic tool, and also as a research tool. So thank you for that. So what I'd now like to move on to is thinking about some of the problems in using the FMQ and your tips for overcoming these. So back to Mick for his views.
I think one of the very common problems among practitioners is not giving it, I suppose, the importance it deserves, and not allowing or allocating enough time for the family member questionnaire. So in practice, what we do in our service and what I do in my own practice is I try to do the family member questionnaire at the at the assessment stage, at the pre-step 1. So that allows me enough time to go through the family member questionnaire, to explain it in detail, to explain the importance of it, and to explain to the family member why we do it. And it also explains why it's only in the last 3 months, especially if a family member has been dealing with a situation for a number of years and has only now come forward for support and for help. That why we only do the family member questionnaire in the last 3 months. Otherwise, you'd probably want 200 questions on it, and instead of just the small number that we have. And in that then as well, is to explain the confidentiality part of it, because that is a concern for family members, is that if they don't understand that it is confidential, and that when we do submit it back to our national body, and even in our own files, that it's just a number on it, and then they're not identified, nor is their family member identified, and that's really important to them. And then also, when we tell them then that it's actually for research purposes as well, they feel that they're actually feeding into something, not just on a national level, but on a global level. And that's important. And then they realize too that what they're doing and what they're going through is very, very similar to what other people in other countries are going through. So for me, it's allowing it enough time and to fully explain it and make sure the family member fully understands why. And then why we revisit it at the end of the 5-step program, and then 3 months after that. So they understand why we keep going back to it again.
Great, thanks, Mick. I think there's some really good tips there. So moving on to Paul.
Yeah, I agree with everything again Mick has said there. And I really, about the explanation part, again, it's Dan mentioned the normalization process. That begins, I think, even when you're explaining the FMQ, because family members, when you explain this is based on a stress strain coping support model that people work with family members worldwide, and you're able to explain findings where that family members in different countries actually respond pretty much the same as you do. That's again very reassuring for family members. And it starts that process of normalizing their situation and reducing, I suppose, isolation and the feeling of coping alone and all that sort of stuff. Another challenge I would have found at the initially doing the questionnaire is sometimes allowing yourself to go into a question with a family member, so I think I had one session and we were 45 minutes in and I was on question 3. so we have to learn by that process. I suppose initially as a practitioner, because we're always under pressure, we're always, you see 2 or 3 page questionnaire and you sort of go, but I would say to people to bear with it because it becomes indispensable to your practice and to your delivery of the method. And it's like any new tool that we start, you know, once you've delivered it 2 or 3 or 4 times with a family member, it becomes like second nature. You know, I think we have to get our own heads as practitioners around the language and the language of the questions and the way they're structured. But I find, and again, the anonymity piece, assuring the person it's randomized numbers, their name doesn't go anywhere. People can have a fear around, especially parents of younger kids, fear around criminalizing or stigmatizing them. So you must be very clear that you know, it's a collection of data and not of information or names. But I have a lovely story with a family member when I was doing my own tapes way back when we trained. We were just saying 2011, and I'll never forget this guy. You know, I explained to him, if you wouldn't mind me recording the sessions, and he said, yeah, okay. And I said, there'll be people in the UK listening to these and it will help me in my work and my practice and help other family members. And he was delighted. But I remember one day in the session, you know, I had the thing on the desk between us and he was talking away, and he turned around to the recorder and I want to say they're doing a great job here in Ballymun, Paul. And he was actually so pleased to be part of something. So I think it's something we have to do initially, but it's something can be turned into a huge positive.
Oh, thanks, Paul. And that's a great example of its use. Thank you very much.
I don't know if Richard remembers listening to the tape.
Thank you.
Yes,
And moving on to Dan.
Cheers. Yeah, I've got a couple of points to make here. So one of the problems that we found is sometimes the affected family member's loved one is in treatment for gambling, and so at the moment they might not be gambling, which then affects the scores quite a bit on the FMQ and makes it look like they haven't scored highly enough to need help. So I found that some people then look at it and think, actually, I shouldn't be here. I don't need your help because this week things are better, or in the last few months things have been better. So I've scored okay. So how we've got around that is using, again, like we said before, to aid discussion. So it's talking about how someone's addiction, no matter if it's gambling or anything else, does change. So sometimes people are doing well in treatment and not gambling, and then they might have a lapse and then things change, or they might not be talking, so they don't realise what's going on. So I sort of use it as a way to sort of talk about what's different now and aid discussion. And also it gives me a chance to sort of say to them, what do you think's happening? So why are the scores low at the minute and you're still feeling like you need help? What's going on? So again, it's using it to sort of just talk. Another thing that we find is sometimes the family member struggles to focus on the questions. So it might have been years and years that person's been under so much stress and anxiety around the person who might be gambling, and then all of a sudden they come to a session and you're asking them to focus on a piece of paper and ask them some questions. So a way around that I found is, like people have mentioned, having like a pre-session where you do the FMQ beforehand, and then you might bring it to the session and talk about the scores rather than actually doing it in the session and doing the scores then. And I found that helps. Or spending the first 10 minutes actually just talking about anxiety and stress and trying to calm the person down, and then moving into doing the sort of FMQ and not straight away jumping in with a questionnaire. So, yeah.
That's great. Thanks for those points. So just to summarise some of those. So the key things are like explaining to the family member the purpose of doing the questionnaire is vital. And a couple of people have mentioned it is good to do it as a pre-assessment and to do all of that, and then to leave the discussion in step one, that you can review some of those answers and have a longer discussion about it. Crucially, allowing enough time to do it, and also mentioning about the confidentiality. That's really crucial, and this idea of randomized numbers, but also that people are adding to this worldwide body of knowledge. And then a couple of really good examples of it, it aids the discussion, it focuses on the family member, and it normalizes things for the family member. And I think, as Mick said, it's indispensable to the method. So I think there's some very good points there about the use of it and how to overcome some of the issues. So thank you for that. So moving back again to it being used as a research tool and what some of the problems are there and some tips to overcome them. So over to Lorna.
Yeah, I think there's two things I'd like to mention. First, a common problem that we see is that practitioners do not always fully support the use of outcome tools, particularly when they're going to be used or for research purposes. And some practitioners can also make the assumption that family members are going to be equally reluctant to maybe fill in forms and questionnaires and things. But I think in our experience, we found the opposite is more likely to be the case. And we've heard really powerfully from Mick and Paul and Dan about the importance of using a tool such as the FMQ, and just how powerful it can be when a practitioner gets on board with such a questionnaire. But also family members, as Mick and Paul and Dan have all said, can find it really helpful both to understand their situation and then to reflect on whether and where there's been change after they've completed an intervention. So for family members, it can be a central part of the work. I think a second common problem that we've seen is that some services do not have the systems in place to be able to record and then to collate the FMQ data. And so this can make it hard for services to fully understand and to promote the role of 5-step in their service. So we think, and we always kind of recommend when we're starting work with services, that they consider what needs to be in place administratively to be able to use the FMQ and to maximise the potential. So kind of really ideally, the bottom line is that the FMQ should be seen as a mandatory part of all 5-step work and not an optional extra.
Okay, thank you very much, Lorna. Moving on finally to Richard.
Well, thinking about the FMQ in its research purpose, I think that there are 3 common problems that need to be borne in mind when facilitating a family member to complete the FMQ. The first is that we sometimes see FMQs where some answers have actually been missed out. So it's really important for the practitioner to ensure that all the questions are answered, that there is a tick or a cross against one answer for each of the 33 questions. The second common problem is that even if all of the 33 FMQ questions are answered, the very basic demographic information, which is at the last page of the form, isn't completed. So it's really important for the practitioner to make sure that this very basic demographic information is completed. I've just been looking at about 350 sets of before and after FMQs from across the world to see how large the changes are following a 5-step method intervention. And almost half of these 350 sets do not have even very basic demographic information. For example, we don't know if the FM is male or female, or what their age is, or what their relationship is with their using relative. And all that means that the evidence that we have to show commissioners and others that the 5-step method is helpful to family members is much weaker. And the third common problem is for the practitioner to get pulled in to trying to interpret for the family member what a question means or how the FM should answer it. So this needs to be guarded against. We do really need each family member to answer as best as they can, and for them to select an answer to each question which most closely represents their view, and not for us to try and work out for them what they should put down. So those are the 3 main common problems that I've seen.
Okay, thank you. So I think what this roundtable discussion illustrates is the very powerful use of doing the questionnaire for the family member and for the practitioner. And on a research basis, it's vital, as Lorna said, is to have the organisational systems in place. And then Richard emphasising the practical things to make sure you've got all the answers and all the demographics. And you would have seen from the previous clip where I went through using the FMQ and some of the research results. In fact, we've collected data from well over 800 people, but we haven't got some of the after questionnaires, or we've got missing data. So our data set is a lot less, and it would be vital going future that we do get all that information. And then we can all say with confidence to a family member that this is adding to the worldwide research about how useful it is for family member changes within your own organisation and then worldwide. So I want to thank all our panel members for all their tips today. So thank you very much, everybody. So just to sum up some of the key points from the panel. The first set of points relate to using the family member questionnaire as a therapeutic practice tool. And it was emphasised it's really important to explain to the family member why you're asking them to fill in the questionnaire. It's also crucial to explain confidentiality and that only no names are shown at all, and it's just a random number on the questionnaire. And it's important for the practitioners, remember, it normalises the experience of the family member, because family members often say, oh, I can't be the only person experiencing this. And it aids discussion with the family member about items they might not have thought relevant or necessary to discuss. And it's really a very important tool because it helps with the discussion of each of the subsequent steps. And family members at the end of step 5 find it really valuable because it validates the changes they have made and shows them how much things have changed since the start of the sessions. And even though 5-step is just a brief, semi-structured intervention, it really makes some powerful changes. You can also use the family member questionnaire online and through automated tools such as Smart Survey, and we've got some web clips to show this. And as one of the practitioners in the Republic of Ireland said, it's absolutely indispensable to the 5-step method. So our panel also emphasised some key points about using the FMQ as a research tool. So every family member filling it in adds to the body of evidence, and it's especially important to get evidence of the effectiveness of the method in our routine practice, as opposed to it being in a research trial. It really shows the impact of the method in the individual, the team, the service, the organisation, and at a country level. And it really helps funders to know the outcomes. And then, as Richard emphasised at the end, it's really important that you get all the answers to the questions and to all the demographics. And importantly, organisations need a system in place to record and collect the data. So I hope they've given you some key tips. So a big thank you to everybody involved in the production of this video.